Hey, everybody. It is Wednesday, May 28th, 2025. You're listening to the Mo News Podcast. I'm Mo Shwanunu.
And I'm Jill Wagner. This is the place where we bring you just the facts.
And we read all the news and read between the lines so you don't have to. On this National Hamburger Day, Jill Wagner.
Moshe, I'm going to go out on a limb and think that you might have the history of Hamburger Day.
Jill, that's no limb. You've been here several years now. This ain't your first rodeo. Yes, I'm glad you asked. And I'm sure many people this morning, as they listen to this podcast, are like, yeah, what is the origin of the hamburger, Moshe? Thank you for bringing us that. Well, first of all, most importantly, if you're thinking about lunch or dinner tonight, you don't have plans, free hamburgers at Burger King, deals at Dairy Queen, Kroger's, Shake Shack, Wendy's. Apparently, Jill, we've let the folks down. It has been Hamburger Month. May is National Hamburger Month, along with other things. But today is National Hamburger Day. So there have been deals all month. And if you haven't taken advantage of those deals, well, today is the day, May 28th, National Hamburger Day. Or I should say National Hamburger Day. Because,
please
Jill,
don't.
It turns out that the hamburger comes from the city of Hamburg, Germany. And so as all these Germans started to come to the U.S. in the 19th century, Hamburg, Germany was known for its export of high-quality beef. So American restaurants began offering Hamburg-style chopped steak. Over time, we would begin to call it hamburger. Incidentally, I didn't know this. In the 19th century, if you saw a doctor and you had some medical ailment, they might prescribe you raw beef, like raw ground beef. This is why, like, people are always like, oh my God, it's never been worse. And no, it has been worse. In the 19th century, sometimes a doctor would prescribe you raw beef, raw uncooked meat if you had an ailment. And then they discovered, maybe we should cook the meat Hamburg style. And among those, Jill, a doctor from New York named James Salisbury, hence the Salisbury steak. So that was a doctor who invented that. And he's like, listen, it's healthier if we cook the meat. We should not prescribe it raw.
And tastier.
Yeah. I mean, I know that, like, what's that called where you get the uncooked, like the appetizer?
Beef tartare style?
Yeah. Steak tartare, beef tartare. I'll take the tartare of the 21st century over the raw beef of the 19th century. But yes, typically you want to do your ground beef cooked just for, your health purposes.
I'd say cooked well. I'd even probably go that far.
Are you well done? You're not even medium well? You're well.
Medium,
huh?
Maybe medium.
Yeah,
but I even cook my salmon. I like my food cooked really well.
You're like my parents.
Nothing wrong with that.
It's not if it's not a little burnt on the edges. It hasn't really been cooked. Anyway, there you go, folks. Happy National Hamburger Day.
All right, everyone, let's get to the headlines now. A big change when it comes to COVID vaccine recommendations. Which groups are now not recommended to get vaccinated? Trump versus Harvard. The fight continues. What the Trump administration is up to now and why the president of Harvard says it won't hurt the school. It's going to hurt all Americans.
Jill, and some interesting comments from the president of Harvard in an interview yesterday over on NPR. We'll tell you about who he says is actually being discriminated against on campus and what he's hoping to do about it.
Plus, the humanitarian crisis in Gaza and a new push to get aid into the Gaza Strip. How's it going? King Charles heads to Canada with the defense of Canada's independence.
Yes, King Charles would like to remind everyone he is also technically the King of Canada. They're in the Commonwealth, folks.
To tech news, a new poll shows most Americans want companies to slow down when it comes to AI.
Yes, and I would also like $1 billion.
And what is a school to do with a surge in students using AI to cheat on papers and other assignments?
Back to those blue books. That's what I keep hearing from teachers. We're going to make them write in class again because we don't trust what they're bringing in typed at home.
My hand still hurts just thinking about it.
And the ink,
number 2 pencil, the ink that I would get on the right side of my hand. A record breaker at the box office thanks to 2 massive films. And what in the world is Sardine Girl Summer? Yes, those sardines, the little fish. That's what we're talking about.
Jill, is everything girl summer, this girl summer, hot girl, enough? I declare enough sardines.
All right, it's Sardine Boy Summer.
I'm done with the declaration. Every summer needs a theme now. I'm fine. You know what?
And it's so stupid.
Jill,
Yes, I agree with you.
I can't wait for why this is Sardine Girl Summer.
Moshe has on this day in history.
We go into the history of the Volkswagen Bug today, how it went from Hitler's favorite car to sweet, cute, and marketable in the U.S. The interesting history behind the Beetle.
All right, let's start with the big change when it comes to COVID protocols. The federal government is no longer recommending children and healthy pregnant women receive COVID-19 vaccines. Health and Human Services Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. made that announcement Tuesday, saying the vaccine has been removed from the CDC's recommended immunization schedule.
There's no evidence healthy kids need it today, and most countries have stopped recommending it for children.
We're now one step closer to realizing President Trump's promise to make America healthy again.
Why this matters, the decision will make it harder for parents to get their children vaccinated and for pregnant people to get the shots. And that's because insurance companies will likely no longer pay for them. Kennedy made that announcement with the FDA commissioner, Dr. Martin Makary, and also the NIH director, Dr. Jay Bhattacharya. He said it is common sense and good science. They say there's basically no evidence that healthy kids need the vaccine today and that most countries have already stopped recommending it for children. We should note independent advisors have been reconsidering the COVID vaccine recommendations, but the CDC's Committee on Immunization Practices is actually not scheduled to meet until later this month to make a recommendation. So it looks like these officials just jumped the gun a bit here.
Yeah, not surprising, though. We know where Candy stands on most vaccines, including the COVID vaccine, and they're effectively going around the typical process here. The CDC has not published any information yet about his changes, including what conditions would make a pregnant woman or child healthy or unhealthy. It's also not clear how the move affects the primary series of COVID shots given to babies as young as 6 months at a point in which they may not have immunity to COVID. And so it's pretty extraordinary here that you have a health secretary removing vaccines from a CDC vaccination schedule without undergoing the typical consultation process with the expert panel. By the way, we should note the CDC doesn't have an acting director right now. Now, this does come a week after the administration made changes that could dramatically restrict the availability of the next round of COVID boosters. The government will now require additional testing for the vaccines to be approved for use by anyone other than those who are at high risk from COVID, because they're 65 or older or have risk factors or other health problems. So as far as they're concerned, the philosophy here when it comes to RFK and this new group is that they see more harm than good in giving booster after booster to healthy people who are least likely to suffer the worst effects of COVID, and without evidence, without long-term studies here about whether annual boosters are that much more helpful in the process as we see these various variants. They want more testing here. The previous philosophy until RFK and from these major medical organizations was, well, we think there's more harm from COVID than from potential side effects of COVID to a certain number of people. So you see a reversal of that philosophy here. Like you said, most countries around the world do not recommend the COVID shot for kids specifically. The focus really has been on folks above the age of 65 or with various conditions, which could lead to a much more extreme case or potentially a deadly case of COVID. Now, not surprisingly, pushback here. You have the American Academy of Pediatrics. They say that this move is very concerning. The chairperson there, Sean O'Leary, says, I think it's going to be very confusing, not only for parents, but also for public health professionals and medical professionals. This takes away choice, is what they claim. It's so interesting because then you have RFK and that whole group saying, no, this gives people choice. Now, notably, Jill, we should mention, and we've gotten this question a number of times, you can still get this. If you're a healthy adult, if you want your kids to get it, you can still get this. But in all likelihood, insurance will not pay for it. So that means that you might be paying a couple $100 a dose here. If you look at vaccinations right now at CVS and other places, about $200 per dose. And you need multiple doses, whether it's Pfizer or Moderna here. So for many folks, that's several $100s that they would have to pay out of pocket and might be, cost prohibitive. And we've already seen a decreasing number of people getting the COVID vaccine. It is now a minority of Americans, about less than 20%, who are getting, these additional boosters. Other medical organizations beyond the pediatric organization, the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists, also expressed dismay here. It has been recommended to get the COVID shot while you're pregnant. The idea being, and some research being, that you are passing along immunity to the fetus. They cited data that showed, this is CDC data from 2022 through 2024, the vast majority of babies who were hospitalized for COVID had been born to unvaccinated mothers. Now, the majority of mothers now are unvaccinated, who haven't gotten the latest booster. So, remains to be seen the correlation there or the causation there. But again, if you want the vaccine, it appears you can get the vaccine, but insurance, now that CDC is pulling back its recommendation, will not cover it except for in certain instances.
The irony, of course, being that it was under President Trump that the vaccines were first developed and really streamlined. Operation Warp Speed, right?
Operation Warp Speed. Trump, actually, there were discussions within the first Trump administration about calling it the Trump vaccine, naturally. He wanted to put his name on the vaccine. And then he saw very quickly in the last few years, as the public opinion has turned on it, particularly on the right, and ultimately was talking less and less about Operation Warp Speed to the point where he doesn't talk about it at all anymore. And has put in folks like RFK who are very vaccine skeptical, including for the COVID vaccine.
And Moshe, just a reminder that COVID is still a thing. There is actually a new highly infectious COVID-19 strain. It led to a spike in hospitalizations in China. It's now been detected in the United States. This is according to the CDC. It is the NB181 variant, first detected in the U.S. in late March and early April among international travelers that were arriving at airports in California, Washington State, Virginia, and New York City. Experts have been tracking it after it became dominant in China this year. In Hong Kong, authorities there say that COVID cases are at their worst levels in at least a year and that they have seen a significant increase in emergency room visits.
Yeah, so that's the situation. We keep getting these variants round and round, but again, the viewpoint of these new folks, RFK and company, they again think the vaccine does more harm than good. Though we are awaiting data on this, Jill. There's a lot of claims out there, and I imagine people listening to this have various folks in their lives and their families who have various viewpoints on this. Jill, it was fascinating going through the direct messages on Instagram yesterday because I was hearing from medical professionals who say they have difference of opinion within their own practices. And some folks who say, well, I'm a doctor, I'm married to a doctor. We have different viewpoints about whether to vaccinate kids for COVID. So there is a robust discussion happening here. And now you see it reflected at the highest levels of government in terms of what to recommend here, whether we know enough, because there was this big move initially with this fear of COVID. And now the question is like, what long-term here will make sense and for whom? And it looks like they're trying to gather more data here. And when they release more data on exactly how they came to this decision, that'll be interesting and we will bring it to you.
All right, now to the latest escalation in the war that President Trump has effectively declared on Harvard. The Trump administration is directing all federal agencies to look at ways to cut remaining contracts with the school. So that's worth about $100 million in total. It comes after the president tried to ban Harvard from enrolling international students. That was actually blocked by a federal judge after Harvard sued. The Trump administration's already frozen more than $2 billion in federal funding, mainly for research, including medical studies at the college. That's something Harvard is also suing the federal government over. The White House has taken aim at elite schools that it argues have fostered anti-Semitism on campus, have liberal biases, and indoctrinate students with anti-American sentiments. Harvard's president, Alan Garber, says that the federal funding cuts aimed at punishing the university, quote, don't even hit the same people that they believe are causing the problems, but instead impact the entire U.S. population. And that is because the money goes to things like medical research. In 2024, nearly 70% of Harvard's sponsored research revenue came from the $686 million in federal funding it received. So they do research on things like obesity, organ transplants, cancer, neurodegenerative diseases. Again, Harvard's already sued to try to stop the federal government from blocking aid and from blocking international students, which make up about 25% of their student body. Those international students also usually pay full tuition. And it isn't just Harvard. Politico is reporting that the U.S. has paused all new interviews for student visa applicants as it considers imposing significantly expanded social media vetting on them. If the administration carries out the plan, it could severely slow down student visa processing and hurt a lot of the schools which rely heavily on those foreign students. Some of those international students that were headed to Harvard are reportedly weighing going to school in other countries.
Yeah, that's a major concern here is this fight will lead some of the best and brightest from around the world to consider, maybe I should go to school in England or go to school in China or go to school somewhere else and not come to school in America, in particular as they hear these stories about what's happening at the border. This increased vetting right now when it comes to foreign students. There was a report yesterday in Politico that right now they're effectively freezing interviews for student visas coming from abroad as they seek to put in new rules on vetting social media, as the government now is really scrutinizing foreign students for anti-U.S. views, anti-Israel views, views against U.S. foreign policy, a whole variety of things. Jill, just before we go further on the international student front and what's happening in regards to what the Harvard president is saying, pulled up some numbers here on what the money from the federal government goes to at Harvard. Just to give you a sense, it doesn't go towards like tuition payments or housing, whatever. It goes to a lot of research. Among the studies impacted by this $100 million cut, a $500,000 contract to research energy drinks, a $50,000 contract to research the effects of coffee, a $39,000 contract for graduate student research services. So just a lot of researching. But you know, when you get those new studies, the new study tells us coffee is good, coffee is bad, energy drinks do this, energy drinks do that. A lot of that is coming out of higher education. So what appears we'll have one less study related to energy drinks, one less study related to coffee, but then more serious things, as you mentioned, in terms of disease research, cancer research, a variety of things. And that's what, when people push back saying, why are we sending all this money to Harvard? A lot of it's for these studies, things that we think are of national importance that Harvard might not have the funds to or doesn't have the priority to study. They're focused on things that are kind of more centered around the university. And so that's why you have a lot of federal funding and grants that go to universities like Harvard. And in some cases, you might not have the same level of research or the types of researchers you would need at other universities. And so not everything is, apples to apples or replaceable when it comes to Harvard. But I wanted to get to, before we leave the story, Jill, some of the comments from the new president of Harvard, Alan Garber. He sat down with NPR to talk about all of this. Funny enough, NPR also a target of President Trump. In fact, they filed a lawsuit yesterday to fight back against his attempt to cut funding from NPR. So you have Harvard and NPR sitting together here. And he was asked about a lot of these accusations from the administration. Alan Garber of Harvard saying, in terms of anti-Semitism, he has learned more about the sentiment on campus from this internal study that he conducted. He said there's a lot of troubling findings in the reports about his campus. And he said the most troubling form of anti-Semitism and anti-Israel bias is the social exclusion of students based on their identity. So they're getting these reports that people will talk to other people, but then they'll find out that they're Jewish, or they'll find out that they support Israel, or that they're Israeli, and they'll stop talking to them. There's this social exclusion issue. Here's a bit of what Garber said.
If a student sits down at a dining room table and they have good conversations with other students who don't know them, and when the other students find out that that student is Israeli, if they refuse to continue to speak to them, we have a serious problem that we need to address. That has been, to me, the most disturbing aspect of what we've experienced, and it was highlighted in that report. And that is why the problem we're trying to solve requires different solutions, perhaps, than what we do throughout the nation.
Garber said the school needs to foster more civil discourse and diversity and respect for different opinions, which is just a remarkable thing to say, Jill, because, it's a college campus, and not just any college campus, Harvard, right? Where like the best and brightest of the future. I mean, who went to Harvard? You have a whole variety of folks, including some prominent conservatives. Ron DeSantis, Ted Cruz, Harvard law graduate as well. And I could go on and on. Tom Cotton, Republican from Arkansas, also a Harvard grad. So you do have some prominent conservatives there. But the thing that Alan Garber admits on his campus is it's not just Jewish students, it's not just pro-Israel students, but it's also conservatives that are shunned on campus. And an acknowledgement that there is a massive lack of political diversity on these campuses, that almost entirely the professors are liberal, and if they're conservative, they're scared to speak up. And so you can't have robust discussions on these campuses right now. And that is a concern to him. And that's one of the reasons why you have this effort by the White House and by Republicans to say, unless things change, we're cutting the funding.
And Moshe, was interesting. As you know, I am a comment reader on social media posts. So
beware, Jill, beware.
One of the reasons I don't sleep well at night. But we had posted a couple of Garber's sound bites and clips from the interview. And like with everything in the Middle East, everyone seems to have an opinion. And some of the comments were defending the students who were refusing to sit with Jewish or Israeli kids because of their religion or ethnicity, which I found pretty shocking, actually, given that I expect, I think, more from our audience, which is, I think, a more thoughtful, accepting audience.
I think the majority of them are, Jill, but it's a big audience now. We hit several million people now. And so ultimately, a lot of folks in the comments. And one thing that we've seen increasingly among the younger generations, especially younger liberals, is this belief that if somebody has views that they disagree with, that they shouldn't have to even listen to them, that they should call on their campuses to ban those views. I mean, I saw it happening on my old campus. You know, I'm an alum of George Washington University. And at George Washington, it's a few blocks from the White House. There's Republicans, there's Democrats. A number of members of Congress are alums on both sides. And there's this effort in the last couple of years. You know, they freaked out when Clarence Thomas was going to speak on campus, a Supreme Court justice, because he's a conservative. And liberals on campus were saying, no, we can't hear from him. When 20 years ago, I don't think we would have said, oh my God, we can't have a Supreme Court justice on this campus regardless of their views. It's a Supreme Court justice. But there is this feeling, you see this in survey data. You see this from young college students who are like, I can't have a roommate who has viewpoints that I disagree with anymore, when that was sort of the point of college, to be exposed to diverse viewpoints and to be able to have a civil conversation. But things are not civil, especially not in the Instagram comments sometimes. Sorry, folks, that we can only do so much to manage those. But, this is where we're at in this country. And you see this happen domestically too. Blue people moving to blue states, red people moving to red areas, because they don't want to even have to deal with a neighbor who disagrees with them politically anymore. And it's a really unfortunate circumstance that we live in, that we sort of live in social media, digitally, in our bubbles, and now are taking to real life.
And speaking of real life, a quick update on the Middle East, a new push to get aid to the Palestinians in Gaza. There is a new effort called the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, or GHF. It's backed by the United States and Israel. The goal, according to Israel, is to try to distribute aid in Gaza that will not be stolen by Hamas. So under this new system, there's going to be a small number of distribution points in southern Gaza, where pre-selected family representatives would be able to pick up a heavy box of food for their families. And then American private contractors would essentially secure the zone. So far, it's off to a pretty rocky start. On Tuesday, thousands of Palestinians overran one of the newly established aid distribution sites, only hours after the Israeli military announced this new aid system. There was some footage posted to social media. We posted it on our Instagram account that showed crowds surging into the area and taking boxes of food.
So the organizers there, the GHF, the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, downplaying the incident. They said they had to step back because they were overwhelmed at times by the people seeking the aid. Just for background here, Israel hasn't been allowing food, medicine, and fuel since early March. They came under pressure from Europeans, other allies of the Israeli government, along with the Trump administration, saying, you guys got to allow it in there. The whole plan by the Israeli government was to cut things off and hope that Hamas would cut a deal. Didn't work. And so ultimately you have increasing desperation inside the Gaza Strip. And that explains, I think, the pictures that we saw unfold yesterday there at that distribution site. Now, as far as Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, hugely controversial. The head of the organization resigned this week, saying there were too many restrictions from Israel, that it's not fully independent here. They need cooperation, too, from existing humanitarian organizations operating in Gaza. And so far, the UN is like, we're not cooperating with you. We used to handle this stuff. But they're annoyed and frustrated. The Israelis and the Americans have pushed them out. The feeling is that the UN organizations were too close to the Palestinians, too close to Hamas, and they had examples of individuals from UNRWA, which was the UN aid organization there in Gaza, participating on October 7th in the terror attacks and holding some of the hostages. So the Israelis are like, we're not playing with this anymore. We're creating our own thing along with the US. So that's controversial here. Unfortunately, people suffering through all of this is a lot of these Gazan civilians who, some of whom there have been protests against Hamas lately, but not in a mass way because they're very concerned about the ramifications of that and what Hamas has done and could do to them. And then at the same time, you have this fight between the aid organizations and the Israeli organization at the same time. But Israel really coming under pressure here in recent weeks as the humanitarian situation has really gotten bad in parts of Gaza.
And one reason we'll be watching this so closely is controlling aid in Gaza is one of the reasons Hamas has gotten so rich over the years. Basically, they take the free aid from the world, they then confiscate it, they then sell it and tax it in Gaza. So they've made tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of dollars through the years. So they're very concerned that this is successful, this new U.S.-Israeli effort to distribute aid. That is just one more weak point for the terror group that has now run Gaza for 17 years here. So it'll be very interesting to see what unfolds here as Hamas doesn't want this to succeed. The UN is annoyed about this. They sort of don't want this to succeed either. The U.S., though, putting pressure on the UN in the last 24 hours, saying, guys, get with the new program.
All right, time for the speed read from the Wall Street Journal. King Charles delivered a subtle message to President Trump in Canada's parliament. The country already has a king. In addition to the United Kingdom, Charles is technically head of state of 14 Commonwealth realms, and that does include Canada. Charles said in the rare address on Tuesday that the country is firmly self-determining, which is rebuking Trump's repeated suggestion that it becomes part of the United States. Charles didn't call out Trump directly, but he did play up Canada's proud sense of national identity.
Today, Canada faces another critical moment. Democracy, pluralism, the rule of law, self-determination, and freedom are values which Canadians hold dear, and ones which the government is determined to protect.
Democracy, pluralism, rule of law, self-determination. Typically, when the country is 150 years old, you don't have to talk about its self-determination, but they feel the need to do that these days in Canada. We talked about that meeting Mark Carney, the new prime minister, had with Trump a couple weeks ago at the White House, where Carney's like, we're good. We're good being independent. And Trump's like, are you sure? We should still talk about that. You guys becoming our 51st state. Trump has mused about it publicly, including to the new prime minister, but ultimately King Charles sort of reinforcing it. Charles's speech showed how even the British monarch, which ceremonially is in charge or the head of state for Canada, he officially, if you're Canadian, you're a subject of King Charles. So he made this visit here. His mother, Queen Elizabeth, back in 1977, made a speech before the Parliament as well. And so ultimately, this is where things stand. Negotiations continue between the Canadian government and U.S. government in regards to all the trade back and forth in recent months.
From Axios, while the tech industry is looking to speed up all advancements on artificial intelligence, the U.S. public would be happy to hit the brakes. CEOs, investors, and tech companies have pushed the narrative of do or die AI, but most people would rather get AI right than get it first. More than 3/4 of Americans, 77%, want companies to create AI slowly and get it right the first time, even if that delays breakthroughs. And that is according to the 2025 Axios Harris 100 poll.
Well, that's nice, Jill. People want AI and these companies like Microsoft and OpenAI to slow things down. Google, hey guys, can you just chill out over there in Silicon Valley, moving so quickly? And by the way, it's across generations. This is not surprising. 91% of boomers say slow down AI. Then you have 77% of Gen X slow down AI. Millennials appear to be the most AI friendly here. 63% of millennials say slow things down, but ultimately that's the lowest number. And then you have Gen Z, which is 74%. So 74% of Gen Z say slow things down, 77% Gen X, 91% boomers, and then most AI friendly, the millennial set, 30 to 45-year-olds, 63% there. Jill, I was trying to get a sense of like, or get my head around, why do we think millennials are there? And the only thing I could come up with was that, yes, all generations have experienced a massive amount of tech change, but for the millennial group, especially us kind of sort of older millennials, the amount of change in our formative years has been significant. Because like, I remember, having a typewriter as a 4th grade, a computer in 7th grade, the internet coming in 8th grade, the first cell phones in high school, my first cell phone in college, text messaging in college, social media in college, smartphone just a couple years out of college. And so, ultimately there, I think maybe that my assumption is that millennials are so used to this quick change in our lives, especially in those sort of key years growing up, that we're sort of like, bring it on.
Moshe, I buy it. We have seen how technology changes so quickly, and usually it's for the better, right? I mean, I'm certainly glad that I am carrying an iPhone instead of one of those Zach Morris phones like from the 90s.
Right. It comes with its bad sides, right? As we've learned about social media and our attention spans and a whole variety of things. Maybe. Nonetheless, the majority of all generations say slow things down, and I am here to tell you, good luck with that sentiment. It is very unlikely at this juncture. We have a escalating battle here between Chinese AI companies and US AI companies, and within US AI companies. And we are very much at the beginning of the beginning of the beginning. I mean, think internet, like Prodigy, CompuServe, AOL circa 1992. That is where we're at right now with AI folks. And increasingly, companies are looking at pivoting to AI in massive ways, not just as a consulting mechanism, but to actually do jobs. And there's various numbers out there. I had an incredibly interesting conversation, Jill, with the Bank of America tech forecaster, Chaim Israel. We're putting that out as a premium podcast at the end of the week. And then it'll go out to everybody else in the next few weeks. But if you want to, get that first, become a premium member. And he was talking about AI replacing 7 of 10 jobs in the world. 7 out of every 10 jobs. It's like, that is massive. That is billions of people in the next few years. He's like, yeah, governments, education systems, everyone needs to like buckle up and get ready and be ready to pivot here because a lot is about to happen. And as much as we wish it slow down, things are only accelerating here. So anyway, just teasing ahead to that conversation. We'll have that for you in the coming days, especially if you're a premium member.
And sticking with AI, there has been a surge in AI cheating among students. Not really a surprise, I think. The use of generative AI to cheat rampant, apparently, in high schools and colleges, but there isn't really a consensus on how to fight back. And AI's use and power only going to rise. So that means sussing out when students are secretly using it and avoiding the temptation for teachers and professors to overuse it themselves. One English teacher tells Axios that any assignment that you take home and have time to play around with, there's going to be doubt hanging over it. He posted on X about how one of his students got caught submitting an AI written paper and then apologized with an email that appeared to be written by Chat GPT. He couldn't even write the apology himself.
No. When you get addicted to ChatGPT, it's very easy. ChatGPT, please write a very apologetic letter to my teacher, and like put some sentiment in there that you hope won't get me put in detention or worse from my school. Jill, not surprisingly, ubiquitous college, high school here. 1 in 4 13 to 17-year-olds say they use ChatGPT. I would argue that number is probably far higher. That's just the number of students willing to admit it. 1 in 4. And ultimately here you are seeing the impact of AI assisted schoolwork here. The majority believe it's impacting students' attention spans. Cheating has increased. And the big concern is that students are not prepared when they get to college and they can't write. They can't do some basic things because they've had ChatGPT write most of their stuff. It turns out that doing something, the old Malcolm Gladwell rule of do it for 10,000 hours or 10,000 times to become an expert is something that happens when you actually write some, are given 10,000 writing assignments over the course of your primary, secondary schooling. So I keep hearing from teachers that ultimately, blue books, tests in class where they actually test people and their writing is key because then teachers are very quickly able to discern whether all those assignments you've been handing in all semester were actually written by you.
From the Mo newsletter, box office numbers for Memorial Day weekend 2025 broke a new record of more than $322 million. The debut of Disney's live-action remake of Lilo and Stitch grossed $145.5 million domestically and then $304.2 million in the global box office. Disney's live-action remakes of beloved films are profitable, but they are kind of controversial. Some critics say that remakes stifle Disney from producing more original films. And it isn't just Disney, Moshe. It's every production company. Everything's a remake now.
Jill, I'm glad you said Lilo of Lilo and Stitch, because it turns out, and I was hit hard in the DMs on this, I said Lilo and Stitch a couple weeks ago. People are like, Moshe, we expect better from you. You're right. I've never seen the film, and I didn't take the extra moment to check pronunciation, and I messed that up. And so I apologize. And here is my official correction. It is, in fact, Lilo and Stitch. Again, my apologies. I hope for those of you who have forgiven me and still listen to this podcast, you will accept my apology.
Well, the reason that I got that correct, Moshe, is because I watched the original Lilo and Stitch, and had I not, I would have said Lilo and Stitch. But as I'm watching, I turned to my husband. I'm like, did they just say Lilo? Is that how it's pronounced? So no, I butcher the names of world's leaders, foreign cities, but Lilo, I will get correct.
Yeah, listen, your kids are old enough to watch it. So soon enough, folks, when Olivia is old enough to watch these films, I will pronounce the hell out of all these cartoon characters. Anyway, a couple other films doing very well right now. The new Mission Impossible with Tom Cruise. Allegedly, his final performance as Ethan Hunt in Mission Impossible. That premiered $63 million domestically, $190 million globally. A reminder, if you're planning to see a movie, AMC still has its 50% discount days on Tuesday and on Wednesdays. So if you can get off or you're working from home and you want to go see a film, you can go check out these box office hits for half price today.
So Moshe, when I'm doing our daily news call with the whole team, and I'm not only muted, but my video is off, I may or may not be at the movies.
Watching Lilo and Stitch.
Anything. Mostly just eating the popcorn. And finally, a new and unexpected trend, Sardine Girl Summer. From USA Today, there is a glimmering new icon swimming into your summer, a sardine. Apparel and products featuring the petite, salty fish are all over the internet right now. Sardines are known for their long, slender bodies and bulging eyes. So Moshe, you might be wondering, what is the draw here? Apparently, they are the online world's cutesy representation of the Mediterranean lifestyle. Search interest in finned fashion has reached a record high in May of 2025. That's according to Google Trends. Beaded sardine bag searches are way up, as is the sardine dress. Searches for that have doubled over the past month. One TikTok user says, everything in the past month has become all things sardines.
Oh, yes. The salty snack is apparently appearing in our hair, our beds, across our chests, dangling from our ears. Do you have any sardine paraphernalia these days, Jill?
Nothing. I'm not on top of this trend.
No, you're way behind on sardine hot girl summer.
In fact, Moshe, when I order a Caesar salad, I usually request no sardines.
No sardines. But I think, are those anchovies or those sardines?
Oh, anchovies. Forget it.
Jill, I think a lot of people would be like, one man's sardine is another woman's anchovy. They're both salty. They're both fish. I get it. Apparently, Jill, they went deep in this story. There's a professor of Italian cultural history that has declared that sardines are a very humble fish. There are questions as to whether sardines are a recession indicator. It shows our cheaper way of life. I don't know. I think people read too much into all this stuff. I guess sardines have become hot on TikTok. It's like all these TikTok trends. So, if you see sardines appearing left and right, it's part of the trend line this summer, folks.
So is anyone actually eating the sardines or just wearing them?
I think so. I would assume. I mean, there's sardine people. We tried to get Olivia, my 20-month-old, to try sardines recently. Wasn't having it. She was not into it. But she is into a lot of adult foods. I will give her credit. Like, we had Mexican, we have Italian, we have she's into sauces, steak, chicken. We're very proud of her very refined palate at 20 months old, but sardines not a part of it. She's not part of Sardine Girl Summer.
Enjoy it while you can.
Until she's just chicken fingers, French
Pasta,
fries,
mac
pizza.
and cheese. Yeah, I don't know what happens. Out of nowhere, they're just like, we will only eat 5 different foods.
All right,
and
we're
that's it.
20 months in a few days here. I'll let you know when the switch flips. All right, we end here with On This Day in History. As I told you at the beginning, we're going to talk a bit about the history of the Beetle, the Volkswagen Bug, on this day, because it turns out on this day in history, May 28th, 1937, the government of Germany formed a new state-owned automobile company called Volkswagen Werk, or the People's Car Company. And in addition to his campaign to build autobahns and these highways across Germany, Hitler's pet project was a small, affordable, yet speedy vehicle. So ultimately, Hitler called an automotive engineer at the time, Ferdinand Porsche of Porsche, and he designed the Volkswagen Bug, $140 at that time. He wanted to keep it under 1,000 Reichsmarks. And so they display it in 1939, just before World War II began. But then ultimately the war begins. Germany starts invading everybody. And so they halted production. You get to after the war, and Volkswagen was still a car company and they're trying to sell in the US. But Americans were not so keen on buying Volkswagens due to their Nazi connections. And so they hired an advertising agency in the late 50s to launch a campaign. And so they tried to basically remarket the Volkswagen Beetle. And so they dubbed the car the Beetle. They thought it had sort of a cute feel, a cute name. And ultimately, consumers started to buy them. And there you have it, folks, the history of the Volkswagen Bug.
So rebranding actually can work.
Yeah, they're like, yeah. We know, like, Hitler, like, that was his car. But, like, what if we call it a Beetle and we talk about how cute it is?
Hook, line, and sinker. We got those Americans. We got them.
The hippies all wanted it. There you go. All right, fast forward here on this day in history. In 1957, the National League voted to allow the New York Giants and the Brooklyn Dodgers to move to the West Coast, the New York Giants becoming the San Francisco Giants and the Brooklyn Dodgers becoming the LA Dodgers. And we end here with a bit of pop culture history. On this day in 1999, turning 26 years old today, Notting Hill, starring Julia Roberts and Hugh Grant, premiered in theaters. And music history, on this day in 1969, turning, can you believe it, 56 years old today, Sweet Caroline, slightly younger than Caroline Kennedy, who we believe to be the inspiration at that time for Neil Diamond's Sweet Caroline. But he has recently told people, Jill, no, it wasn't Caroline Kennedy. I just needed a 3-syllable name for the song. So according to Neil Diamond, he did an interview with the Today Show a few years ago. He said the song is about his wife, but his wife's name was Marcia. And he couldn't get Marcia to rhyme. And so he went with Caroline. And there's been a storyline for years that it was written about Caroline, but she was like a teenager at the time. So there's a creep factor. Why is Neil Diamond writing about this young girl, Caroline Kennedy? But he says, no, it was about Marcia, my wife, but her name didn't work for the song. And so I made the song Caroline.
Neil Diamond, I don't buy it. That
Sweet
makes
Marcia.
no sense. Yeah.
Oh.
The whole, no.
He had the beat. He had the song, but he needed a 3-syllable name. He could have gone with Samantha. He could have gone with, what are some other 3-syllable?
Vanessa. Jillian.
Jillian's only 2 syllables, Jill. That's 2 syllables, your name.
Jill-E-N?
Oh, with an emphasis of the E.
Yeah.
Jillian. But you go Jill-E-N. Sweet Jill-E-N.
No one's ever said it like that. Ever.
You're really stretching your name there out by that extra syllable.
And it's not even my real name. That's not my name.
Are you not full Jillian?
No, just
Jill.
Jill.
You're just Jill.
Yep.
Simple. All right. Well, anyway, he attempted to, not unlike Volkswagen with the Beetle, he rebranded the song. It wasn't about teenage Sweet Caroline. It's about my wife, Marcia.
Sure.
But by the way, how did Marcia feel about that? She's like, thank you for the song that's about me, but doesn't have my name in it.
It was almost like after years of her being like, when are you going to write a song about me? He was finally like, you know what? Sweet Caroline
my
was
most
actually about you.
Song, you sing at Fenway Park, and that everyone like knows the words to. That was actually about you.
All right, guys. Happy Hamburger Day.
Hamburger Day.
Thank you for listening.
To you, Marcia. Happy
Yes.
Hamburger Day to Marcia.
Yeah, thanks, guys, for listening to the podcast, the Mo News podcast. If you like what you hear, please share this with your friends. It really does help us grow. Follow us, subscribe so you don't miss an episode, and review us kindly in the App Store. We appreciate it.
Have a good Wednesday, everybody. Tomorrow's Thursday. It's a short week. Week's almost done.
Thanks for listening to the Mo News podcast. Have a fantastic day. I hope you enjoyed.